All right, so Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim and Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh, everyone. Inshallah, today we're going to be continuing what we were doing yesterday, which basically was in regards to the tafsir. But we went over, you could see all the scribbling on Tafsir al-Qurtubi right there, and we talked about number one. We talked about ذلك أن لم يكن ربك مهلك القرى بظلم وأهلها غافلون. We discussed a couple points. Number one is the word ذلك, which basically tells us that there's always a relationship between the situation, the circumstances that you are in, and between what had actually happened in the past. In other words, whether we're talking about your individual actions or the community actions. I want you to look at this one because this was actually talking about a community. The one before it was the ones before it were generally talking about the individuals, but then you could see on this page there's ya ma'shara, and speaking about a community right there, because in the beginning of this page it was actually talking as an individual. فَمَن يُرِدِ اللَّهُ أَن يَهْدِيَهُ يَشْرَحْ صَدْرَهُ لِلْإِسْلَامِ. That was more directed at an individual, but then that wasn't necessarily just a law that pertains to the individual, because then it continues to tell us, well, that is not just the individual, but there's a law that controls the whole society, the whole community at large. It goes and basically follows the same paradigm. You do what is good, that will later basically cultivate the good that will come back to the community and certainly affect the future of that group of people, whether we're speaking about jinn or whether we're speaking about ins, and whether we're speaking about this dunya or whether we're speaking about akhirah. And then we also looked at a couple things, which is when it said ذَلِكَ, and letting us know that there's a law that even the society, even if we're talking about something that everyone in on earth basically had united to do, at the end it will affect the society at large. And the Prophet ﷺ had actually given that as an example. We didn't say this hadith yesterday, but the Prophet ﷺ gave us a parable, and he said it's like people going onto a ship, and you got people that are on the upper deck and people that are on the lower deck. If the people on the upper deck, when the people on the lower deck would ask them to make a hole, or the people on the upper deck would want to make a hole and basically penetrate through the ship in order to fetch water that is underneath the ship, then if the people in the lower deck do not stop them from doing so, then everyone else is going to drown and sink. So therefore, if on the other hand they were to stop them from making a hole in the ship, then it's not just the ones in the lower deck that are going to be saved, but it's basically going to be everybody. So when you look at this parable in the hadith, it basically lets us know that al-amr bil ma'ruf and nahy an munkar, ordering for what is good and forbidding what is bad, is basically as a key thing that creates this paradigm to do what is right, because your future is not necessarily just determined by your actions, but it's also determined by the people around you and their action. So when this ayah basically says ذَلِكَ أَن لَّمْ يَكُن رَّبُّكَ مُهْلِكَ الْقُرَى بِظُلْمٍ وَأَهْلُهَا غَافِلُونَ, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is letting us know that no destruction happens just because Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala just wanted to destruct a city. But whenever destruction happens, whenever aggression happens, whenever a malfunction in the universe happens, it basically happens as a result of the wrongdoing within the society. And that's also to let us know that the wrongdoing, in other words, we're talking about behavior, we're talking about vision, all of these two, amanu and amilu salihat, that it has a direct relationship with what goes on even in nature. Say it again. Nature recognizes, and things in nature would recognize what you're doing. Wait a minute. What are you saying? Remember the ayah when Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, فَمَا بَكَتْ عَلَيْهِمُ السَّمَاء, that the skies did not tear as a result of their elimination. Whether it's we're speaking about the mujrimeen, whether we're speaking about the pharaohs, or whether we're speaking about the different nations that basically had been corrupt and ended and basically diminished eventually, all of that, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, فَمَا بَكَتْ عَلَيْهِمُ السَّمَاء. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, the earth, the skies, they did not cry over them. So that is to let us know that things in nature that you may think has no understanding, no, let's say, relationship to our behavior, think again. Think again, the things around you, they recognize whether you're obedient or whether you're not obedient. They may not have this type of intelligence to, one, communicate, or even two, fully understand, but Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is letting us know that there are things that in the society, in the community, in nature, in basically finances, in the way that different forces are running, whether we're speaking about laws or whether we're speaking about fear, whether we're speaking about happiness. In other words, we're talking about psychology, we're talking about economy, we're talking about politics, we're talking about health, we're talking about mental health, all these different things. You may not recognize that there is a correlation between your submission to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and the malfunction that happens in the world and on your health and even in the universe around you. Just keep that one in mind. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala tells us in this word, ذَلِكَ, although a preposition, but Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is letting us know that there is a paradigm, there is a pattern, there is a certain force that determines how things function and why they function in that way, and that there's a direct correlation between the choices that you would be making and between the consequence and how things would basically run. So what are the things that would affect this type of, let's call it, the forces that basically run around us? Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is letting us know that number one force is غَرَّتْهُمُ الْحَيَاةُ الدُّنْيَا, is the mental force, is the vision that they would be living in this dunya, thinking that this is their only place, their only destination, and that this is basically their place of existence and no purpose or no other destination. And they would be just so fixated on this dunya that they don't even recognize that this dunya is nothing but a bridge to the akhirah. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala tells us that as a result of that fixation on dunya, they ended up being in a state of ghafla. And we said the state of ghafla is when a person is fixated on a matter, whether it is one, trivial, or whether it is important, or whether it is good. If it's distracting them or pacifying them from a main center in what really matters, then that's a form of ghafla. So if you are doing qiyam al-layl, but then leaving your fajr prayer, that's a ghafla, because Fajr prayer is considered, like we said it yesterday, we said, imagine as if it's a test. You had a test that was out of 25 marks, and you had basically one question, which is a 20-pointer, and the rest of the questions were 5-pointer each. So then if you focus on the 5-pointer each, and you end up focusing and putting your energy to solving these questions, well, even if you were to get them all right, then you would only get 5 points. But if you were to focus on and 5 out of 25, that's a fail. But if you were to focus on the 20-pointer, which basically is your main credit, then you would be getting 20 out of 25, even if you didn't answer the 5-pointer ones. So even if it may be a good thing to pray Salat Qiyam al-Layl, but if you lost your Fajr, then that's that form of ghafla. So whether it's a good thing that you are doing, but then you need to put in the terms that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala had basically determined, and how these terms would determine basically the classification of what is a priority and what is a second degree good thing or third degree good thing, and so forth. Then we went into وَلِكُلٍّ دَرَجَاتٌ مِّمَّا عَمِلُوا. But then a sister brought up a question, and she said, well, when you say وَلِكُلٍّ دَرَجَاتٌ مِّمَّا عَمِلُوا, a daraja is a step. So if you were to say a step after a step, we're talking about certain steps. Let's say these are 20 steps. Then the person at step 15 is not equal to the person that was probably taking step 2 or step 1. We'd say definitely. But why is it that sometimes we would use the word maratib and not the word darajat? What's the difference? And we basically gave that example, and we said, well, the word daraja is one degree after another, and that there are certain degrees in order to get to a certain rutbah. What is a rutbah? Rutbah, think of it as a state. So think of it as when you go up, and let's say you finish 12th grade, and then you get into college, and then you get the degree. What's after the degree? What's after that PhD? And it becomes, well, you got really the highest degree. But then we go into a new classification. This new classification is a classification within, let's say, Salihin, within al-ulama, within those that had reached the highest level. There is no daraja, but there is a rutbah. There's a rutbah. A rutbah basically means a new category of classification. This new category of classification, they're all salihin, but this person is salih and alim. This person is a salih and a alim and a abid. This person is a salih, a alim, a abid, and a zahid. So now we go into new classifications. This alim, he's a alim, but he is also a alim and a taqi. Okay, now we go into different classifications of, okay, you're all going to be basically considered as surpassed the darajat, but then we go into these classifications of what really makes this alim or this salih different from another salih. So then that classification goes into a rutbah. A rutbah, and it would be different because it becomes a status. It becomes an honorable status in the eyes of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and perhaps even in Jannah. A daraja, well, the person is taking it step by step. They're learning to go up the ladder, and in order to go up into the rutab, there are certain ladders that you might need to pass in order to get to that rutbah. So you've got maratib al-salihin, you got maratib al-ulama. This is a hafiz, this is a alim, this is a mufassir, this is a muhaddith, this is a mujtahid. All of those are maratib. Darajat would be this person is going up the ladder to learning about their Islam, and from learning about their Islam, then they learned how to live the discipline. And by the way, if you were to look at the level of Islam, remember we've got the level of Islam, then we've got the level of Iman, then we have the level of Ihsan. If you were to look at the level of Islam, those would be more within darajat. The level of Islam would more be as you're going up a darajat. The daraja, you're practicing your perhaps shahada, how to understand shahada, how to understand salah, how to learn how to make your salah, how to stay committed to salah, how to committed to your siyam, at least the obligatory ones, and how to stay committed to your zakah. Those are basically the foundations. In the rutbah, once we get into the iman rutbah, then we get into, the iman level, then we get into some form of rutbah. Why? Because when you look at iman, those are those maratib, those are those positions, because one mu'min could be at a higher level than a mu'min, and the higher you go up with this rutbah of iman, or within that position of iman, the closer you get to the level of ihsan. So how do I get to that rutbah? This person is a mu'min. How do I get from trying to go up the darajat to now getting into maratib al-salihin? How do I get there? The stronger you are in your commitment in applying the positions, applying the principles of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, the stronger you become, let's say the higher in your rutbah in iman you would be in. So what does that look like? If you were to go to the Quran, it always would say, Ya ayyuhalladhina amanu, and then it would tell you what you're supposed to be doing or what you're not supposed to be doing. It's basically giving you and telling you, here's a promotion. Here's a tip. Here's what you would need to do in order to increase your rutbat al-iman. He didn't say, Ya ayyuhalladhina aslamu. He said, Ya ayyuhalladhina amanu. Why? Because he wants to tell you that if you want to be from maratib al-mu'mineen, from the levels and the status of al-mu'mineen, that the stronger the commitment in your relationship, in your practice with those mu'mineen and what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala had given you in terms of tips, that's when you will find yourself deeply grounded and getting closer and closer to maratib al-muhsinin. Keep that one in mind. So therefore, the person that is Muslim, they may have their shortcomings, not that a mu'min cannot have a shortcoming, but a mu'min will not yet be like a Muslim who is probably struggling with this piece of Islam or that piece of Islam. No, they don't even question, it's like Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala told me to pray. There's no question that I'm going to be skipping one day, or probably, I don't want people to laugh at me, or I'm with my hijab, I want to make sure that I fit in, I don't look like an old lady and all of that. That's beginner's level. That's maratib al-muslimin. But stay at least within maratib al-muslimin, and don't get into the regression and then finding yourself with maratib al-munafiqeen. So work on that. You're on the right track. But your goal is to go from darajat al-muslimin to maratib al-mu'minin to later maratib al-muhsinin. Martabat al-muhsinin, the martaba of a muhsin, will not even the maratib al-muhsinin, it's not just one martaba. It is also levels, because you've got a siddiqeen as being within the category of al-muhsinin. So when you look at a mu'min, even those mu'mineen, they're not all on the same level. That's why the Prophet ﷺ said, لا يزني الزاني وهو مؤمن. A mu'min, if they were to commit zina, they weren't in the state of iman. Why not? Because at that point, when they did fall in that sin, their iman and that martaba that they had reached at one point, boom, right there, it just went into this kind of, think of it as a graph and think of it as a bar, and then all of the sudden it made a big long fall in the lowest end, and that was really, really close to the maratib al-munafiqeen. And once that big incline happens, and then for them to go back up again, it's going to be extremely hard. And that will affect them. And that's why when a person reaches, think of it as this way. Okay, let's say this person was in Maratib al-Mu'mineen going up there, and then all of a sudden, boom, they went all the way down there. Now to go back up there again, guess what they have to pass? They have to pass all this. They have to again pass Maratib al-Muslimin again. They have to learn how to stick to that one again and go back, going back up. It doesn't just happen with a skyrocket because they had just dropped all that way. Now they have to work back up again. They have to work back up again. And even though they were right there, they were doing great, but the sudden fall took them all the way down to maratib al-munafiqeen. So then, or darajat al-munafiqeen. Okay, so that's why Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala basically tells us there are darajat and there are darakat. Darajat is basically ascending. Darakat is descending. It's going down. Darakat is going down. Darajat is going up. And that's very important to keep in mind, because one key thing to why people would find themselves from going up the darajat into going into darakat is that moment losing the place of focus, and that is ghafla, losing the place of focus. And perhaps you're doing probably something that is mubah, something that is good, something that is not haram, but there is a better priority. Even if you were to talk about dunya matters, you can be doing something that is good, but then in order to get to success, you have to probably, let's say you're in school, yeah, it's okay to hang out with your friends at a coffee place, okay, and probably, make these funny jokes, silly jokes, whatever it is, but then someone else is probably canceling off their friends for some time at least. I don't want to say literally cancel, but canceling off an appointment here and there because they had a test, because they had perhaps studying to do, because they were aiming high. They were aiming high. Once you aim high, whether in dunya matters, to be a doctor, to be an accountant, to be a sheikha, whatever you want to do, once you aim high, you have to consider your priorities, even if those other matters may not necessarily be wrong, but there are certain priorities that you have to consider. That one, putting your energy, putting your time, and putting your focus is the key. So when you look at the word ghafla, that's one, how much time are you spending in trying to focus on your Islam? So in other words, if you really want to be a good talibat ilm, you might need to cancel a lot of the different social media that you're probably getting distracted in. That's distracting you. You might need to cancel out those social media things. If perhaps your socialization, you're a very extroverted person, if that's distracting you from talab al-ilm, you might need to cancel that one. If perhaps all the different things that are probably taking so much of your time, that's becoming your place of distraction, you have to learn that people that want to go up in their maratib, they gotta keep away from all the things that take away from their one, time, two, energy and potential, and three, focus. You gotta make like a planner and see, how much time am I spending on this? How much time am I spending on talab al-ilm? How much time, how much energy am I putting in? Am I putting so much energy in probably, I don't know, designing the house, and yet not much energy and probably learning my Islam or whatever? Am I putting so much energy in probably work? although it's a good thing, but then I end up getting too tired for my kids, then we need to reorganize our energy, reorganize our time, reorganize our focus in order to make sure that we're not in a state of ghafla. But in order to make sure we're not in a state of ghafla, we need to also consider our priorities based on DNAIM. Your deen comes first. Your health comes second. 3, your mental health. 4, your chastity and your family. 5, your money and your finances. Humaira, go ahead, dear. You want to say something?
Sheikha, I wanted to ask, can طلب العلم be a غفلة as well?
Can طلب العلم be a ghafla?
Seeking
So
knowledge.
طلب العلم in itself, طلب العلم is a good thing. But طلب العلم, if it was at the expense of, remember what we talked about yesterday? There's فرض الوقت. What is فرض الوقت? فرض الوقت is that there's a specific time for a certain فريضة. طلب العلم is good. But if at the expense of طلب العلم, you're like, oh, I'm busy studying, let's say, or memorizing Surah Al-Baqarah, let's say. But you didn't get up for Fajr, then all Surah Al-Baqarah and memorizing Surah Al-Baqarah is going to be ghafla. Yes, dear. There are certain things that are considered at a specific time that it must be done then. So if we're talking about, for example, like I said, Salat al-Fajr, even if you have memorized, even if you were studying a key thing in Talab al-Ilm, at that moment, Salat al-Fajr is what you need to be doing. Then you need to do Salat al-Fajr. All right. There are certain things that even if they are good in, that is a good thing to do. But if it contradicts with what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala considered at that moment, this is the best action that you could do, then even that good thing can be a ghafla. And this is why it's important to learn the deen. It's important to learn the deen because it teaches you how to classify and how to put your priorities in order based on time, based on, let's say, the purpose, and how to connect it with al-akhirah. Like, okay, what's more important? Should I do this or should I do that? That's why it's very important to do talab al-ilm, to recognize your priorities. That's why there's something called fiqh al-awlawiyat. Let me write that down. Fiqh al-awlawiyat. What is that? A beautiful thing that al-Qardawi basically, okay, here, al-awlawiyat. Okay, what is fiqh al-awlawiyat? It's the fiqh. Fiqh means understanding. Fiqh means jurisprudence. Fiqh means to comprehend something. Al-awlawiyat, priorities. So understanding the priorities is in itself a science. Even if you were to look at the Quran, it considered that, wait a minute, even if we were to consider a certain thing that is a good thing, but at that moment, that's not our priority. You can do Salat al-Fajr. Once you finish Salat al-Fajr, then continue memorizing the Quran. But then there's fiqh al-awlawiyat. Okay, so considering a certain specific timing, in considering, even if it's a good thing, you have to know that sometimes you got to delay a good thing because there is something more important at that time. Okay, no. Now, of course, وَمَا رَبُّكَ بِغَافِلٍ عَمَّا يَعْمَلُونَ, and we went in details about al-ghafla and what that basically related to, how Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala had considered that the reason why many would basically get into dhulm. What is dhulm? Dhulm is exceeding the limits. Exceeding the limits. So not until you have ilm, and that's why usul al-fiqh is one of the most important sciences. Okay, one of the most important sciences is usul al-fiqh, but unfortunately, it's not taught that frequently, because I don't know why, but many would think that it's an extra thing to study and not a key thing. a number of different sciences, unfortunately, are not given the attention that is needed. One of those, two of these sciences are, number one, usul al-fiqh, that the principles of fiqh. This is correlated with aqidah. This is correlated with aqidah because not until you understand that the references that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala had considered as part of al-wahi, that you would really understand how to go back to those considerable resources before you even read the data. Fiqh, it's important. Fiqh is within the data category. Remember when we said you've got the resources, then you have the data, and then you have the interpretation? When you look at usul al-fiqh, you're talking about the resources. When you talk about fiqh, you're talking about the data. All right? You're talking about the data. So when you look at usul al-fiqh, that's resources. Number two science is Islamic history and history in itself. Why history? Because you cannot understand aqidah until you recognize the history of your aqidah. That's why Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala would tell us about Prophet Adam, alayhi salam, the creation, Prophet Nuh, and the history of that, and that history of prophets, etc. That's because he's telling us learning history and learning, remember the word dhalika, remembering the patterns that you would see in history. That's the word dhalika. What do you get out of the word dhalika? He's telling you, I want you to see the patterns that you would see in history, that you would see in the relationship between human behavior, and the rise and the fall of civilizations is correlated with human behavior, is correlated with governance, is correlated with the choices that they had made, and the mindset or the whole aqidah that was actually making that particular civilization. Was it Jahiliyyah? What Jahiliyyah happened for the rise or the fall of the Muslim empires or the Muslim Khilafah, or probably the Roman Empire or the American or the British or whatever? What was the rise and the fall? We would usually correlate it with probably, perhaps, maybe governance and maybe an area of administration, etc. But Islam tells you there's actually more to how the rise and the fall that happens to certain civilizations, to certain countries, to etc., and what really is the actual force that brought them in this situation of al-halak. What is al-halak? Al-halak is destruction. Al-halak doesn't only mean destruction, meaning just the elimination. Al-halak could also mean the regression. Al-halak, regression, whether things, probably an increase in crime rate. An increase, is that necessarily a result, or is that something that we would consider as the reason that would cause a result? It's basically two. Injustices bring other injustices. Remember how Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, وَكَذَلِكَ نُوَلِّي بَعْضَ الظَّالِمِينَ بَعْضًا? That's the same thing. And injustice brings injustice. Economical injustices are going to bring in poverty and basically bring in further injustices, because people are seeking wealth. People are basically not feeling the wealth distribution. They're seeking ways to whether get food or whether get whatever, the different supplies that is necessary, etc. That brings in injustice. The injustice brings in another force of injustice, whether we're talking about crime rate, we're talking about perhaps maybe social instability, or perhaps we're talking about maybe turmoil, political instability, all these different things. They would basically start perhaps from an injustice that was founded on a vision of what they considered probably capitalism, communism, the list goes on. And then that starts bringing in the implication of a new force of injustice. Now, is that necessarily the cause or the effect? It's both. It's the cause as a result of, one, the vision / aqidah gone wrong, and then that became the implication of aqidah gone wrong, and then you would see it as an effect within the society of things going into an imbalance. So when you look at that why am I speaking about all of that? Because that's a form of ghafla. A form of ghafla can be, one, considering a form of ghafla can be, one, losing your compass in understanding purpose or understanding the direction. It's two things. When you lose your compass in understanding purpose, then you lost the compass of aqidah. Direction is, think of it as the GPS of amal, of action. So you've got two things. There's one that you recognize, I'm needing to go to this destination. Okay, that's your aqidah. You recognize where you're going to go. But if while you're driving, you keep getting distracted and basically go this place and that place, and you keep forgetting about what destination you're going to, then that's a distraction in amal. That's a distraction in your action. Then you're not going to get to your destination. So in order to get to the destination, I need focus in recognizing your purpose and what destination you're going to, and two, al-amal, to get to that destination. So what does that look like? Amanu وَعَمِلُوا الصَّالِحَاتِ. In order not to be in a state of ghafla, you basically have to get into your iman being in place, and you have to make sure that there is this consistency to be committed to the aqidah and the purpose in order to get to the destination. So what do I need? We need, one, recognition of the destination, two, the compass to stay on track. The compass to stay on track and not get distracted here and there, just like you would say, oh, I'm going to go grocery shopping. On your way, you stop for coffee, and then another time you probably, oh, there's a garage sale right there. You go to that garage sale, and then you're driving further, and you're like, hey, you know what? That looks like a very nice carnival. You get into the carnival, and then you go out of the car. Within the carnival, you're probably, I don't know, seeing a place that sells good food, and you're eating that good food, and then on your way, you basically see your friend, and you start chatting for a couple minutes, and then after that all of those are distractions. Learning how to take away the distractions to get to your destination is the key to success. Whether dunya or akhirah, the success happens when you recognize how to take away all those distractions that are, one, let's say, disseminating, distorting basically your focus, your energy, and certainly your time. All right. وَمَا رَبُّكَ بِغَافِرٍ عَمَّا يَعْمَلُونَ. So we got into that one. Let's go for the other ayah. وَرَبُّكَ الْغَنِيُّ ذُو الرَّحْمَةِ. And your Lord Almighty is al-Ghani. What is al-Ghani? We went in details with this one yesterday, but let's see what al-Qurtubi wants to say about the word al-Ghani. He said, أي عن خلقه وعن أعمالهم. So what does that mean? That the Lord Almighty is al-Ghani. So we said, whenever we would have the al right there, we're going to say whether this is an inclusive al or a specifying al. Okay. He is al-Ghani. He is the one to contain all, one, being one, he is self-efficient, meaning he's not dependent on others. His existence does not depend on others. So even if all the creation had decided that they do not want to worship Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's magnificence, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's divine nature is not dependent on the creation. So let's give this a better explanation. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is al-Khaliq, not because he created, but because of his divine nature that he is capable of creating. He is ar-Razzaq, the one to give provision, not because he's giving it right now, but of his nature, the Lord Almighty being beyond all, and he is capable of giving provisions. So when you say he is al-Ghani, this wasn't as a result of after creating the people, but this is his divine nature. When you say a divine nature, clarify that for me. Okay. When you see the ayah in Surah Shura, we always go back to Surah Shura to understand what we talk about when we speak about divine nature. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala actually, should we go back to it like we always do? Hold on, we're going to jump to it. This is 154. We're going to jump to that in Surah Shura. This is Surah Al-Jathiyah. We're going to get there. Okay, in Surah Shura, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala lets us know that there is a certain law that basically controls that universe. Said, فَاطِرُ السَّمَاوَاتِ وَالْأَرْضِ. He's the creation of the heavens and the earth. He created from yourselves azwaja, spouses, in other words, the binary laws, and he even created within animals the binary law, and he had created basically يَذْرَأُكُمْ فِي, created you to dwell on earth basically, but you cannot, in other words, think that this law that controls the universe, that you can apply it on Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So he said, لَيْسَ كَمِثْلِهِ شَيْءٍ. Remember, there's nothing like unto the Lord Almighty, but that doesn't mean that you would negate his divine nature and keep in mind that he is as-Sami' al-Basir. He's the all-hearing and all-seeing. What does that mean? This isn't talking about just the nature itself of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in his essence, but even in his fi'l, even in his action, لَهُ مَقَالِيدُ السَّمَاوَاتِ وَالْأَرْضِ. He would basically control. When you say maqalid, in other words, the forces that control the heavens and the earth, in يَبْسُطُ الرِّزْقَ لِمَن يَشَاءُ وَيَقْدِرُ, in making the provisions, whether in giving it in an abundance or whether in giving it in according to a certain amount and a certain numbering and a certain value. إِنَّهُ بِكُلِّ شَيْءٍ عَلِيمٌ. He is all knowledgeable, and he is basically the one to have all the ilm. So when he said, لَيْسَ كَمِثْلِهِ شَيْءٍ, in his divine nature, there's nothing compared to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. In other words, don't use the binary laws that you would see in this world, or probably the energy, and that energy means that there's a point that energy is basically going to be lost, and therefore this thing is going to die out. Don't apply that on Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Therefore, the question, how old is Allah, is a wrong question, because you assume that there was a beginning, and therefore, if there's a beginning, then therefore there's an end. But Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala tells you, yes, he is al-awwal and al-akhir. He is al-zahir and al-batin. To tell you that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is nothing of the nature and nothing of what you would see in nature as pertaining to one, laws in biology or laws in physics or chemistry or whatever it is. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is beyond all those laws. So therefore, understand that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala laysa kamithlihi shay. There's nothing like unto Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So don't apply the laws that you would know were creatures. And basically, those were creatures, even the law of dying, living, hey, speed, all of that. Those are the laws that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala created within the creation. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is not a creature, but He is the creator. Therefore, the laws that He had created in nature, they don't apply on the creator, for the creator created those laws. They are not part of what encompasses Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, because Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is the one that goes beyond all these laws, for He is the one that is comprehensive. He is the one that is beyond. He is the one that is al-awwal, al-akhir, the beginning, the one that is the first and the last. And you might see that this is contradictory, but that's to show encompassment. That's to show encompassment. يَبْسُطُ الرِّزْقَ لِمَن يَشَاءُ وَيَقْدِرُ إِنَّهُ بِكُلِّ شَيْءٍ عَلِيمٌ. That's in the foundation of how you would understand your aqidah, how you would understand your vision. Remember, in order to get away from ghafla, you have to use two things. Number one, to have your vision and understanding who your reference is, and then that reference is going to give you the data. What data? شَرَعَ لَكُم مِّنَ الدِّينِ مَا وَصَّى بِهِ نُوحًا. Here's the data. The data is Sharia. That's to help you recognize your destination. That's to help you recognize what things you should be consistent in and what your priorities are. And therefore, to recognize that, that's to create a leader that would basically be committed. فَلِذَلِكَ فَدْعُ. What you need to be doing, فَلِذَلِكَ فَدْعُ. That in that, you need to be basically the leader, to call people out. Why a leader? Because there's no way that you can be a person on a mission if you are just an idle person and not a leader. Yes, you have to be a leader. Every Muslim must be a leader. I don't mean a leader to be a president or to be a sultan or whatever it is. No, a leader is basically a person that is carrying the mission and carrying basically the legacy of the Prophet. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, فَلِذَلِكَ فَدْعُ. This is what you need to call for. وَاسْتَقِمْ كَمَا أُمِرْتَ. And you have to be on that istiqamah. You have to be on that preciseness in making sure that you're following the right path as you were ordered. Why فَاسْتَقِمْ كَمَا أُمِرْتَ and not just فَاسْتَقِمْ without saying كَمَا أُمِرْتَ? Because there is a certain path, there's a certain booklet, there's a certain pamphlet, there's this direction that you basically have to follow. كما أمرت, not based on your terms, but based on the Lord Almighty's terms. ولا تتبع أهواءهم. And don't follow their whims and desires. وَقُلْ, and say, آمَنْتُ بِمَا أَنزَلَ اللَّهُ مِنْ كِتَابٍ, and say, I believe in what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala had revealed in the book. Why? Because the second that you announce it as an identity, you announce it as you are proud to say, that's when you recognize that you had fully embraced al-istiqamah, embraced the right consistency in following the principles of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. 2, put in the patience. 3, so this one is recognizing the definition of justice. Then this وَاسْتَقِمْ كَمَا أُمِرْتَ is putting in the sabr, putting in the patience. There's no way. No one told you Jannah is easy. Yes, we're not going to tell you that it's going to be all happily ever after. You're going to put on the hijab and everything's going to be fine. No, there's going to be you're going to be sometimes getting overheated. Yes, it's going to be very hot. And yes, definitely sometimes it's going to be probably choking you. And perhaps sometimes waking up for Fajr, it's like, oh my God, I really need, I'm really thriving for more sleep. And sometimes it's basically, yes, you're so hungry, but yeah, you got to be fasting. Yes, you're really hungry. You're probably going to a moment of probably feeling dehydrated and probably dizzy. But hey, Jannah is not ever, you were told that Jannah was an easy price. There's always something in a hardship to overcome. There needs to be sabr. No one ever said that it was going to be easy and a walk in the park. That's why sabr is key. So he said, وَقُلْ آمَنْتُ بِمَا أَنزَلَ اللَّهُ مِنْ كِتَابٍ. There's that commitment. There's that area that's going to perhaps come in to tell you to, hey, we'll make it easy for you. We can give you other paths. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is letting you know that there's a point that you would have to put in that iffa. What is al-iffa? Al-iffa is satisfaction. You're going to have to perhaps accept and give up on a lot of halal in order to stay committed and away from ghafla. Meaning what? Yes, I have to give up on halal. In Nawawi, for example, I don't want to be too utopian, but he used to give up on eating watermelon and eating grapes and eating cucumbers, because that was always getting him pacified by putting him to sleep. His body is feeling good and cool because he used to live in Syria. So sometimes it would be really hot in the summer and really cold in the winter. And of course, watermelons and grapes, they're basically summer fruits. So you would not be finding that in the winter. And basically, of course, it's going to cool you and basically hydrate you in the summer. But he wasn't eating that because he was basically feeling that it was going to distract him from seeking ilm. I'm not telling you to do the same, because remember, those are maratib that we're still far away from, okay? That's a martaba, that's a really high level. But at the end, just think of it as right there, وَقُلْ آمَنْتُ بِمَا أَنزَلَ اللَّهُ مِنْ كِتَابٍ. You got to put it as a commitment. I believe in what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala had revealed in the book. How do I know and get to that point? There's no way that you can get to that point to be proud of your identity without talab al-ilm. Talab al-ilm is key, because if you don't know what is actually in that book, Al-Quran, and what Muhammad ibn Abdullah was actually teaching you and how to be committed to that book, then you're not going to be capable of defending this identity. And that's why Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, Qul, I want you to say it, but you're not going to be able to say it. It's not an issue of just saying it in words, but you have to say it in action as well. Remember, actions speak louder than words. There you go. You're not going to be able to say it until you know it. So know it by seeking ilm. وَأُمِرْتُ لِأَعْدِلَ بَيْنَكُمْ. Now that, and I was ordered to bring about justice, that takes us to the final understanding of what it takes to stay away from ghafla, which is having the courage to stand up and say, you know what, Sharia, Islam, this is why it's a solution for humanity. This is why it's a solution for family injustices. This is why it's a solution for myself as well, to help me go into the right direction. I'm not confused about anything. Why? Because we basically had the ilm. I'm not talking about me as an individual. Okay, let's see. And here, أمرت وأمرت لأعدل بينكم الله ربنا وربكم. You connect with your aqidah in order to understand it. This isn't whatsoever just some rhetoric or some slogan that we would somehow just speak without having basically the foundation. This isn't just a rhetoric, but this is basically something that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is telling us within the Quran to realize and to learn. So when we speak about al-ghafla, we have to understand what the word ghafla basically means and how that relates to the other ayat for us to get a good understanding of what we're talking about. So when you say وَرَبُّكَ الْغَنِيُّ ذُو الرَّحْمَةِ, Al-Qurtubi explained that one, and he said in relationship to Al-Ghani, he said that means that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is basically not in need for the creation that he had created. And plus, he is not in need of their commitment. So what does that mean? Well, that reminds me of the hadith when the Prophet ﷺ said, even if all the people, الجن لو أن أولهم وآخرهم وإنسهم وجنهم كانوا على أتقى قلب رجل منكم ما زاد ذلك في ملكي شيئا. Even if all the human beings and all the jinn were as pious as the most pious of you, that would not increase in the power, in the glory of the Lord Almighty. And even if the first generations and the first nations and the end nations and the ins and the jinn were all at the heart or at the practice of the worst one of these creations, that would not decrease anything from the glory and the might of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. وَرَبُّكَ الْغَنِيُّ ذُو الرَّحْمَةِ. Why connected to the rahmah? Because Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala wanted you. Remember, Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Ar-Rahman and ar-Rahim is basically the most frequent name in the Quran. Ar-Rahman and ar-Rahim. And then you have al-Ghafur. Al-Ghafur, the one that forgives. Okay, so the rahmah. But when we say Rabbuka al-Ghani dhur rahmah, does that mean on everyone? Well, the rahmah here, this is just letting us know that rahmah is going to be for those that are committed to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, is going to be for those that would be in relationship with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, which is il-wali wa ahlu ta'atihi. What is il-wali? Il-wali is basically the one that considers Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala as their place of authority. Number two, considers that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is their place of principle. That Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is my place of principle, then therefore He's the one that defines my path. Then therefore I would give all my will. I would submit my will. My will includes my decision making. My will includes my desires. My will includes all the things that I would want to do, but I would submit it to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and that's a ta'a. A ta'a is basically obedience. Obedience is basically giving up on your will for the will of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, for the order of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. إِيَّشَأْ يُذْهِبِكُمْ. So when you say إِيَّشَأْ يُذْهِبِكُمْ, if He wills, He would eliminate you. Like how? Eliminate? I thought this was telling me رَبُّكَ الْغَنِيُّ ذُو الرَّحْمَةِ, inviting to His mercy. Right now, when you say إِيَّشَأْ يُذْهِبِكُمْ, this is more of a threat. Within the same sentence, there is a threat and there's a call for giving me hope. How is a threat and a hope within the same sentence? Just like فَفِرُّوا إِلَى اللَّهِ. Exactly the same way. When you look at فَفِرُّوا إِلَى اللَّهِ, whenever you're scared of something, you run away from it. If there's a fire, run away from it. No matter what you're scared of, you run away from it. But Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala said, فَفِرُّوا, you run away to Allah. فَفِرُّوا إِلَى اللَّهِ. Same thing. رَبُّكَ الْغَنِيُّ ذُو الرَّحْمَةِ يَسْأَلُ you. He's basically your Lord. We didn't say وَاللَّهُ الْغَنِيُّ ذُو الرَّحْمَةِ. He said وَرَبُّكَ, not وَاللَّهُ. Why رَبُّكَ? Because he wants to let you remember that he is your Lord. In other words, all the different things that make you in the state of cherishment, in the state of stability, in the state of feeling good, happy, whatever it is, taking away the anxiety, all of that, that actually comes from the one that cherishes you, that gives you the stability, that gives you all the things to be possible around you. That's Rabbuka. That's your Lord. So now Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is letting you within that sentence, Rabbuka al-Ghaniyyu dhur-Rahma. I want you to look at this one. Because when you look at the word Rabb, just the word Rabb is reminding you that he is the one that basically has the mercy to give you all the different things that sustain your life. But then he also said Dhur Rahma. So he is telling you he is Al-Ghani, and at the same time connecting the word Al-Ghani is like, I'm not in need for you, but you need to consider and remember he is the one that's giving you all the different things that sustain you, all the different things that cherish you, all the different things around you, and plus he is the Lord of mercy. Rabbuka. You can say Wallah. Even if you were to say Wallahu al-Ghaniyyu dhur-Rahma, the word Allah is more showing a hierarchy, but the word Rabb is more showing a relationship. Dhur-Rahma. When he said Iyasha yudhhibukum wa yastakhlif min ba'dikum ma yasha, he would have willed, if he wanted, he would have just eliminated you. Let's look at these words. Iyasha, if he would have willed, yudhhibukum. The root is dhahaba. That's the word dhahaba. And then yudhhibukum, eliminate you. وَيَسْتَخْلِفْ مِنْ بَعْدِكُمْ مَا يَشَاءُ. What is يَسْتَخْلِف? The root is خَلَفَ. خَلَفَ basically means to bring after. That's why we would say al-khilafa. What is al-khilafa? Al-khilafa means the leadership that comes after. How did they get that word? Well, after the Prophet ﷺ, they needed a leader after the Prophet ﷺ. So he was a khalifa. When Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala had said, and that's when they said, what did they understand? There's another creation. That's a following creation. That's the word following. In other words, there was a creation before us. What was that? That's a different story. Okay? يَسْتَخْلِفْ مِنْ بَعْدِكُمْ is telling us, well, if you don't actually follow the path, there's a consequence. You don't want to embrace Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's rahmah. Just keep in your recognition, and also keep in mind إِيَّشَأْ يُذْهِبَكُمْ. He would eliminate you at the end, and وَيَسْتَخْلِفْ مِنْ بَعْدِكُمْ مَا يَشَأْ. He would create a new generation after you that is going to make a change. It's quite interesting. Ibn Khaldun, this Tunisian scholar, he basically had written what is called al-Muqaddimah. But here's one thing. I want to look at this one. It's quite interesting. He actually talks about nations in how they start and how they grow and how they end. So in other words, you had some scholars actually say they were always scrutinizing different nations. What makes a nation begin and a nation end? Are we talking about nations taking a replica of, let's say, a father bringing in a child and the child basically growing and getting kids and basically, moving on and basically, is it similar to the life of a human being, of a child in that way, or is it similar to perhaps a seed and how it grows and eventually basically dies out? What really can we understand in the process of how nations grow and how they die out? So Ibn Khaldun had the theory that nations, they grow the first generation. So we've got, let's say, a civilization. There is a generation that basically works hard and aspires to create a civilization by perhaps removing the injustice, fighting against injustice, fighting against basically all the different things that they are sick of. They thrive in that sense, and then they get to success. They get to victory. It may take, generations, but then they get to victory. But then once they get to victory, the generation after that, they're still maintaining things because that generation basically built a relationship with those in victory. But then the third generation, he considers that that's when the beginning of the fall and for that civilization begins to happen. They start going back in their relationship with the discipline that had created the civilization. They start giving up on it and they start focusing on those, let's call it the different privileges of victory, and not going farther in maintaining the victory or bringing in more victories. So they start regressing and they start losing not only on the privileges, but they start losing on what actually founded victory and what founded all the different things that their ancestors had basically worked on getting. So then they continue with the fall, generation after generation, until it becomes history. That is not exclusive to non-Muslim civilizations, but that's also applicable even on Muslim civilizations as well. At one point, you read Muslim history. You were looking at a Muslim history that was all the way as vast as from the borders of China all the way to basically Spain. All of that was under Muslim rule. Then we started getting smaller and smaller and losing more and more until we finally had fully collapsed. And now we cannot even save one city from a genocide, which we could all see right in front of our own eyes. And guess what? Right now, we're looking at American bases basically moving in the Middle East. Right now, we could be in for a massive and a huge war in the Middle East farther than Gaza. So what is going on? What is coming up right now? The Ummah had basically gone into this extreme weakness that not only did they lose their territories, but not even their life. And they're going to be pressuring the Ummah till it surrenders, until it gives up their Iman. Are they going to give up on their Iman or not? That's what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala tells us. When you look at وَيَسْتَخْلِفْ مِنْ بَعْدِكُمْ مَا يَشَاءُ, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is letting us know that if there's any generation, any nation that gives up on the commitment to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will bring about another generation, another group that will later carry the legacy. That's what legacy? In order to hold on to the legacy, they would basically have to connect to the legacy of al-Anbiya. That's what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala tells us in Surah Maryam. He said, فَخَلَفَ مِن بَعْدِهِمْ خَلْفٌ أَضَاعُوا الصَّلَاةَ وَاتَّبَعُوا الشَّهَوَاتِ What then? فَسَوْفَ يَلْقَوْنَ غَيًّا. He said, well, there was a generation. What happened? خَلْفٌ أَضَاعُوا الصَّلَاةَ. The first thing that they had lost is their priority in salah. So in order to be away from ghafla, what's the first thing that I have to focus on? Salah, 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 and salah. The Prophet ﷺ, while he was dying, he said, as-salatu as-salah wa malakat aymanukum. You just got to focus on salah. You focus on salah. What does that mean? To focus on salah means to understand salah, means to be committed to salah. Once you're committed to salah, then you're going to understand how to be committed throughout your day. Then you understand how to stay in consistency in order to get to success. Then you understand that you need some different break times in order to be just, I remember my akhirah, and just be fixated at that moment on your salah, to remember your relationship, the relationship between your focus and your energy and certainly your time, and that it would be connected with al-akhirah. So when you look at وَيَسْتَخْلِفْ مِن بَعْدِكُم مَا يَشَاءُ, that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will replace that lost generation with a new generation. كَمَا أَنْشَأَكُم مِّن ذُرِّيَّةِ قَوْمٍ آخَرِينَ. Exactly the same way that He created you from the offspring of a different generation. So what is Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala letting us know? He's letting us know the paradigms, what we see today, and letting us know you could either be a leader or someone else will be making you as their subject and making you as their object. You determine what you want to be. And basically, when you look at right there, يَسْتَخْلِفْ مِن بَعْدِكُم مَا يَشَاءُ. So therefore, al-Qurtubi said, خَلْقًا آخَرَ أَمْثَلَ مِنكُمْ وَأَطْوَعَ. He said that would mean that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is telling us that if you don't comply with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's orders, He would create a new creation that would be amthala. What is amthal? Amthal doesn't mean utopian, but amthal means a better example for the other nations, a better example, and also being in obedience to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. When you say obedience, what are you talking about? You're talking about freedom. You're talking a person. If they're submitting to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, then they're definitely free from all the different forces, all the different things that are probably determining their priorities, determining their identity, determining what really matters about them, all of these different things. And that's right there. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is telling us, well, then if you don't actually live up to that, كَمَا أَنْشَأَكُم مِّن ذُرِّيَّةِ قَوْمٍ آخَرِينَ. The same way it created you, He would basically, just like in that ayah, إِيَّشَأْ يُذْهِبُكُمْ أَيُّهَا النَّاسُ وَيَأْتِ بِآخَرِينَ. If He will, He would basically يُذْهِبُكُمْ, O people, He would basically eliminate you and bring other ones. وَإِن تَتَوَلَّوْا يَسْتَبْدِلْ قَوْمًا غَيْرَكُمْ. In another ayah, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, if you turn away, He'll basically bring a new nation. What does that mean? Meaning He'll bring people in your place. Wait, are we talking about geographical place? Are we talking about mechanicum in power? In both. In both. Within a certain area, within power, or even within time. So in other words, when you look at يستبدل قوما غيركم, you know, right now, with the situation in Gaza, you look at all these riots and the, you know, those that are actually making, let's call them the big noise about Gaza. You don't hear that it's in the Middle East. You hear that it is in Spain, Colombia. You hear the Colombian president, you're like, what is this, Abu Ubaidah? You start wondering, is this يستبدل قوما غيرنا? Ya Rabbi, may Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala bring Islam to these people. But you will see the situation that we are in. Are we being traded? Are we being traded? And is Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala bringing in a new group, a new generation that is bringing in justice? Ya Rabbi, may Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala give piety or give Islam or give guidance, whether it's the Brazilian president, or whether it's Colombia, or whether it's you know, the different countries in different non-Muslim countries, and even bring Islam to the Muslim countries as well. Yes, they definitely need a new fath, but may Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala bring guidance into their hearts, because, you know, we're seeing right now that what we need is a government that is having that hikmah and the wisdom and the power to actually stop all of this. إنما توعدون لآت وما أنتم بمعجزين. I don't know why I got, when it said إنما توعدون لآت, it reminded me قس بن سعد الإيادي. Remember him? What did he say? أيها الناس اسمعوا وعوا إنه من عاش مات ومن مات فات وكل ما هو آت ليل داج ونهار ساج وسماء ذات أبراج ونجوم تزهر وبحار تزخر. I know for somebody that doesn't speak Arabic, and believe me, even if it's a person that speaks Arabic, that sounds Chinese. You start wondering if this is even Arabic. Okay, let me explain what that means and who is the person that said this. First of all, إنما توعدون لآت, the word inna actually means a word of affirmation. Verily, what you are being promised is going to come and basically happen. And why did I remember قس بن سعد الإيادي? قس بن سعد الإيادي, he was part of a group called al-Ahnaf. Okay, who are these? So al-Ahnaf, there was a group of people. There were only four men within Mecca. But mind you, these people, although living in the society that was pagan, they were the only ones that were not pagan. So what were they? They were actually called al-Ahnaf. And what they believed in, they believed that there was something behind this world. They don't necessarily know what it is. That, because you want to remember that the society in the pagan times, they basically believed exactly like the atheist would say, it's just matter in motion. And therefore there's no afterlife, no resurrection, no Jannah, no Nar, none of that. And they considered that that was nothing but a myth. Okay. And you had no other faiths really except these al-Ahnaf. There were only four people that believed in that there is a relationship between our existence and that there's something after in the afterlife. What is it? They don't know. Okay. And that, no, these are idols are not God, and therefore we shouldn't be worshiping them. That's just a, you know, just a bold word that they believed in. What should we then be worshiping? They didn't know. Just like when you look at when you look at Zayd, basically Sa'id ibn Zayd ibn al-Khattab, okay? So you're talking about one of them who basically decided, well, I'm going to go on a journey to search for God. That's what he did. And he basically went to Syria and Lebanon and basically Bilad Shem because, of course, the major religions in Christianity, basically, and Judaism, you're talking about that's where the story happened. So he thought by migrating or at least searching, doing a journey to search for God, at least we're not talking about that he's thinking that God is there, but the information about Revelation was going to be there, and some news about Jesus, peace be upon him, or Isa alayhi salam, or Musa or Ibrahim, that somehow we're going to get to some information there. So he basically goes there to get some information. But then the monks, the Christian monks and the rabbis, they tell him that in order to be a follower and basically a person of commitment to that religion, that he has to reinterpret the word of God in order to be part of this institution. So that's when he basically says, well, I ran away from this reinterpretation of the word of God. And certainly, if I were to recognize that that's what the word of God is basically saying, but then I go and reinterpret it to another reinterpretation in order to somehow make myself feel comfortable with me practicing it, then I'm living really in nothing but a ball of contradictions. So that's when he basically decided not to join the religious institutions, that is Christianity and Judaism, which were the main religions, at least the main religions that believed in a revelation. Okay, and of course, you've got on the other side, there was the pagan religions, Zoroastrianism, and all of those. So he considered that that's a pagan religion, which definitely is, and not any different from the pagan ideology that was present in the Arabian Peninsula. The other person is Waraq ibn Nawfal. Waraq ibn Nawfal, basically, remember when the Prophet ﷺ was in Ghar Hira, and then he goes to Khadija, and then Khadija says, when the Prophet ﷺ said, Zammilini, Zammilini, Zammiluni, Zammiluni, cover me up, cover me up. And then she says, by Allah, he will not humiliate you. And in other words, she basically comes from Christian descent, or at least some Christian background, or at least had some information about, let's call it a revelation. So then she takes him to her uncle / cousin, either, somewhere around the lines. Waraq ibn Nawfal was related to Khadija. So in order to understand what happened to the Prophet ﷺ, she basically takes him to Waraq ibn Nawfal, who was living in Mecca at the time, but he basically was not necessarily Christian or Jew, but was a person that was committed to learning revelation. That's all we know. Was committed to learning revelation. The Prophet ﷺ basically accepts to go to Waraq ibn Nawfal. Waraq ibn Nawfal basically tells him, well, this is the same namus, this is the same light, this is the same revelation that had come on to the previous prophets, and he mentioned Musa. The Prophet ﷺ, of course, being in a pagan society, had no clue what these definitions even mean, or what these words and these stories even mean, or who these characters are. So he had no clue whatsoever. So the Prophet ﷺ thought, okay, I'm going to carry on the mission. But then that's when Waraq ibn Nawfal told him that, well, every single prophet that had come with this revelation was actually opposed in the hardest opposition. So the Prophet ﷺ insisted that he was going to put in all the effort and that he was never going to stop. And Waraq ibn Nawfal said, if I were Jada'an, if I were a young man, if I had the power, I would have definitely given you all the support. And later Waraq ibn Nawfal dies. Now the other person is is that قس بن ساعد الإيدي. قس بن ساعد الإيدي, he was not a Christian or a Jew, but it was basically said that this is one of the orations that he gave. O people, أيها الناس اسمعوا وعوا. O people, listen and comprehend to what I tell you. إنه من عاش مات. Whoever lives eventually finds that there is a termination to their life and they would end up dying. ومن مات فات. And whoever dies basically becomes a place of history. But what did he want to get out of that? He wanted to, start out with the premise that, okay, there is this thing that we are seeing. We're seeing people basically living and then they would die. In other words, is this the end of their existence? So then he starts taking from the inspiration of what he sees in nature as an inspiration to let them know that the ending of and the passing of something does not mean the ending of it, but it means it's a cycle. So he starts comparing the human existence to the different things he would see in nature. So he would say, إنه من عاش مات ومن مات فات وكل ما هو آت آت. كل ما هو آت آت, meaning, well, you could see there is a cycle. كل ما هو آت آت, it all becomes into a cycle if it comes back, and it will come back, and here's what we say. كل ما هو آت آت ليل داج ونهار ساج وسماء ذات أبراج. He said you could see it in the dark night. It becomes dark and then it brings daylight again, and dark and later night again. There's a cycle that is bringing in and letting us know that there is a cycle in the way we would see night bringing followed by daylight. ليل داج ونهار ساج وسماء ذات أبراج. And we would see the different horoscopes, the way that we would see the designing of basically the stars in the galaxy. We could see that the stars are designed in a certain way, and we could see that once the earth basically goes into a certain number of days, but then we come back to the same point. So he was basically trying to see what we see in the skies are reflecting what's happening on earth. You look at the sky, something is telling us that there is a pattern. وسماء ذات أبراج ونجوم تزهر وبحار تصغر. It's like ونجوم تزهر, you could see what's happening in the skies. We could see there's a rotation, and we could see بحار تصغر. We could see that these seas are bringing in a wave, and then it doesn't end, but another wave comes and another wave comes, and then it goes away. In other words, he can see a pattern. نجوم تزهر بحار تصغر وجبال مرسى. Very high mountains telling us that, they're not moving, but they're actually deeply rooted in the ground. Why deeply rooted? What is making them rooted? How did they get rooted? In other words, there was a long time in history that made them accumulate into this from a foundation to later on a formation. How did this get formed? How long did it take to form? It gives me an idea, like a chart, like a map, that it was a very long time in history. جبال مرسى أرض مدحى. We're seeing the earth, although, right there we would be traveling, but we don't necessarily come to a point and say this is the end, now we're going to fall off earth. Why? Why isn't there an end? In other words, there's a cycle. What is that cycle? Is it the cycle of a circle of an earth, or is it the circle of a universe, or is it the cycle of life? And what cycle are we talking about? Are we talking about that there is no such thing as, yes, this is the final point, and then therefore there's nothing after it? He's basically telling us there's something after this creation. There's something after. I don't know what it is. He's basically saying inference. In his inference, I don't know what it is, but all I could tell you, this isn't created in absurdity. ونجوم تزهر وبحار تسخر وجبال مرساة وأرض متحاة. And then he would say, ما بال السابقين الأولين من القرون لنا بصائر لما رأيت مواردا للموت ليس لها مصادر. يا معشر إياد، أين الآباء والأجداد؟ أين الفراعنة الشداد? He would say it, speaking to his people. Oh, the people of Iyad, where are those mighty pharaohs? أين الآباء والأجداد? Where did our great, magnificent ancestors, where did they go? Why didn't they come back? What is he trying to say? It's like, if they were more powerful than us and they didn't come back, that means one day we're going to go into their footsteps and we're not going to be capable of coming back. In other words, there is a purpose that preceded our existence that determined where we're heading. I don't know what it is, but certainly there is something to search for, to consider. They were called Ahl al-Fatra. So he was looking at them and said, what would he say in that poem? He would say, we would see the old and the young basically dying. تمضي الأكابر والأصاغر. Why? لما رأيت مواردا للموت ليس لها مصادر. I saw that death is coming in with no source that I can identify. Where, in what is bringing death, what is bringing life? I can't identify the source, but I know it's happening. I know that there is something far more powerful that's controlling life and death and existence and cycle and controlling purpose. Then what is it? I cannot identify it. That was Qas ibn Sa'd al-Iyadi. And through that, you could say, إِنَّمَا تُوعَدُونَ لَآتٍ. It's basically reminding them of not necessarily Qas ibn Sa'd al-Iyadi's words, but basically letting them know in, of course, what you're being promised. You need to see all the different things, whether in nature or in life, letting you know the truth about your existence. Inna ma tu'aduna la'at. Giving us that affirmation, what you were promised in akhirah, what you were promised in the different things that would happen in the different stations in akhirah, or perhaps even whether we're speaking about the reward in Jannah, or whether we're speaking about the torments and hellfire, or whether we're speaking about the judgment day and what would happen, and all of these different things. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is letting us know it is coming, it is happening. وَمَا أَنْتُمْ بِمُعْجِزِينَ. And there's no way that you have the power or the potential to fight it, stop it, or delay it. You're not going to be capable of delaying death, nor are you going to be procrastinating it, or nor are you going to be stopping it, or whether it's death, or whether it's illness, or whether it's basically just different potentials getting taken away from you. Use it before you lose those potentials. Use it in order to get to Jannah. So then it goes, قُلْ يَا قَوْمِ اعْمَلُوا عَلَى مَكَانَتِكُمْ. How do I use it? How do I put it in place? He says, tell them, يَا قَوْمِ, oh my people, اعْمَلُوا, do على مكانتكم, for the status. Remember when we talked about maratib and we talked about darajat? That's included in مكانتكم. Is it مكاناتكم as a plural, or is it مكانتكم? What's the difference? So when you look at اعملوا على مكانتكم, do in, let's say, in what really is going to determine and suggest and basically relate to مكانتكم. المكانة means status. مكاناتكم would be a plural, so we're talking about plural of status, or whether we're talking about positions, an actual place, so Jannah or hellfire, or whether we're speaking about makana to mean a certain position, a certain level, whether it's in a certain status, in martaba, a certain martaba of salah, a certain martaba of ihsan, etc. And therefore, it can be il-makana like al-tariqa. Al-tariqa meaning you do based on what would determine who you are and what you are and what status you hold and what position you're worthy of, and therefore be in a position where you are consistent. اثبتوا على ما أنتم عليه, meaning be determined, be consistent, and be basically the one to stay determined in the position that you are in, for you are doing, working on what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala told you is what really matters. I too, inni amil. I too will be doing that. I too will be working in that. فَسَوْفَ تَعْلَمُونَ, and you will know at the end مَنْ تَكُونُ لَهُ عَاقِبَةُ الدَّارِ. What is العاقبة? العقب is the heel. العقب is the heel. You know the heel, your foot, the heel on your foot. When you look at عاقبة الدار, عاقبة can mean heel, and al-aqiba could mean the final destination. But ad-dar actually means the place that you dwell in. Ad-dar is basically the area, the house, the area that is basically their place of residence. So how is al-aqiba when you say heel and you say makana and you say all the relationship between all of that? فَسَوْفَ تَعْلَمُونَ مَنْ تَكُونُ لَهُ عَاقِبَةُ الدَّارِ. I mean, generally, this basically is saying, well, do in regards to what would determine your position in place, Jannah or hellfire, or what would determine your status in Jannah or the different levels or maratib, inni amil, I'm also doing, I'm not giving you, in other words, when you say inni amil, I'm not just giving you some recommendation, I'm just following you. No, I too am taking from the same medication that I'm prescribing for you, and I'm applying it. I'm actually myself, that is the Prophet saying, I myself am also practicing and also putting this into action myself. In other words, I'm not giving you a prescription, and I'm basically considering myself as not needing to apply it in my life, because I too am part of all of this. إني عامل. فسوف تعلمون من تكون له عاقبة الدار. You're going to know who is going to be basically winning the final destination. But like we said, we're going to get into definitely this ayah, the inference of it is this is a form of tahdeed. This is a form of threat. Just like you were to tell a child, your own child, if you don't eat your vegetables, you're going to see what's going to happen. Did you really say what's going to happen? No, but that's a form. It's not you're giving him information that you're going to see. It's like, I know that. But when you say you're going to see what's going to happen, I'm probably not going to give you some entertainment time, or I'm probably going to take away the cookies, or probably, going to take away some of the privileges that I'm going to give you, etc. So what do? You're basically letting that person know as a form of tahdeed, as a form of a threat. I'm not giving you all the information, but I'm not letting your imagination basically recognize how far that would go. And because I may not give you all the details, I'll just let you know it's more than what you would probably anticipate. So when you look at the inference, that's one side of it. But at the same time, مَنْ تَكُونُ لَهُ عَاقِبَةُ الدَّارِ, okay, when you look at the word عَاقِبَة, you would say, like we said, when we talked about the word, the aqib is talking about the heel. This is to let us know that in order to live up to that aqibah, to live up to basically this final destination, what are you looking at? You're actually looking at what grounds are you basically firm on. Definitely, it's a metaphor, but the steps that you are consistent with are going to determine that aqibah that you are going to be living in. Remember the ghafla that we were talking about earlier? Ghafla is not only in losing your focus, or losing your basically time consideration, or losing your energy, but al-ghafla can also include lack of consistency. To be a successful person, whether in dunya or akhirah, it's all about having that consistency and that grit. And for how long are you going to stay into that commitment? So when you look at al-aqibah, you're talking about firmness in your identity, firmness in your focus. How long are you going to be consistent in that? How long are you going to be in your focus? How consistent are you going to be putting your energy in where it belongs? How long and how much time are you going to be, for how long are you going to be basically determined and focused and being steadfast? And that's al-aqibah. Al-aqibah can mean the final destination. It could also be related to, well, how steadfast are you going to be? So when you look at aqibatud dar, we're here talking about aqibatud dar. Certainly the inference could also be Jannah, and the inference could also be Yawm al-Qiyamah. Aqibatud dar, in other words, okay, Yawm al-Qiyamah, who's really going to be into the dar al-Jannah, that is, and who's going to be making it to the final destination, and who's going to be in that consistency. And that's why he said, إِنَّهُ لَا يُفْلِحُ الظَّالِمُونَ. Just to let you know, this ayah is basically, إِنَّهُ لَا يُفْلِحُ الظَّالِمُونَ. The word, in English, that we would be considering this as incoherent sentence. But in Arabic, this is not an incoherent sentence. Why? Because yes, it said, وَفَسَوْفَ تَعْلَمُونَ مَنْ تَكُونُ لَهُ عَاقِبَةُ الدَّارِ. And then a sentence. So right there, semicolon, إِنَّهُ لَا يُفْلِحُ الظَّالِمُونَ. Verily, the ones that had transgressed the limits are not going to be the ones to be successful. So what is the correlation? He's just letting you know. Did he say, well, من تكون له عاقبة الدار, and then the Salihin would make it to Jannah? No, he didn't say that. So what did he say? Even though the inference could also mean the same thing. That if you say لا يفلح الظالمون, that means أفلح المؤمنون. If you were to say لا يفلح الظالمون, the inference is أفلح المؤمنون. So what do you mean by, and why the emphasis إنه لا يفلح الظالمون and not say وأفلح المؤمنون? That's to say إنه لا يفلح الظالمون, to let them know that one thing is that certainly, and what you can be certain of, is that those that are volumun, those that transgress the limits, that means those that had lived in ghafla, in losing their compass, are basically the ones that will not succeed, and therefore they can be sure that the ones and the only ones that were successful were really the ones that had the grit, the consistency, the focus, the energy, the time, the determination, the steadfastness in being on that consistency for aqibatud dar, for that time on Judgment Day to get to Jannah. And that's the same thing when you look at, for example, when it says, فَسَوْفَ تَعْلَمُونَ مَنْ تَكُنْ لَهُ عَاقِبَةُ الدَّارِ, not an informative clause, but he's basically saying right there, exactly like فَلْيَضْحَكُوا قَلِيلًا وَلْيَبْكُوا كَثِيرًا. They're going to laugh a lot of laughs, but وَلْيَبْكُوا كَثِيرًا, and then they're going to cry many cries. Or just like the ayah, فَسَوْفَ تَعْلَمُونَ مَنْ تَكُنْ لَهُ عَاقِبَةُ الدَّارِ, basically in that ayah, he's not telling them فَلْيَضْحَكُوا قَلِيلًا, go ahead and laugh. No, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is basically telling, go ahead, you can laugh, but it's a form of a threat right there. And that's within that, when you look at makanatikum, is a judge, a scholar in Lugha Arabiya and a scholar in Tafsir. He said, when you look at the word makanatikum, it also carries within it what you would get tamakkunukum fi dunya. What is it, tamakkun? التمكن comes from the root makana. What is makana? Makana actually means that you are in control. So when you look at makana, you know the mechanism, how you would have the mechanism of something, the way it basically functions, the way it basically goes into control, how it functions, how it goes into a certain control. That's makana. Mechanism, makana, same thing. Okay, so makanatikum, he said, it regards to tamakkunukum fi dunya. In other words, the potentials that you are given, how you would utilize those potentials to basically get you for aqibatud dar, to get you to getting to akhirah. And that's mawdi'akum. How are you going to use your areas of control, whether it's yourself or whether it's different potentials, or whether it's money that you probably had, or perhaps maybe it's intelligence, you were so smart and you managed to be, I don't know, in such and such degree, or you probably had another type of power or another type of potential, or whatever it is. Languages, maybe, perhaps, maybe some different potential that other people did not have. You had the charisma. How are you going to use it? Why? For determining your position in this dunya or your position in the akhirah. So, inni amil, I'm going to work, that is the Prophet, peace be upon him, on my makana, on my one, on the potentials and how I'd use them for the sake of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and two, on the potentials and how I'd use them to get to Jannah. Man takunu lahu aqibatu dar. Why? It's exactly like when Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala had said, لِنَعْلَمَ أَيُّ الْحِزْبَيْنِ أَحْصَى لِمَا لَبِثُوا أَمَدًا نحن نقص عليك نبأهم بالحق إنهم فتية آمنوا بربهم وزدناهم هدى. What does Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala tell us? The same idea that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala was telling us. Well, those different nations and those different groups, or these different individuals, or these different, let's say, community working together, they would each work in a certain makana. It's so sad that a lot of Muslims, they are basically always thinking that we're supposed to believe and we're supposed to say that we're not seeking power. Why not? Yes, we are. Why not? Yes, we definitely are. And we should be seeking power. Why? Because أُمِرْتُ لِأَعْدِلَ بَيْنَكُمْ. I was ordered to bring about justice on ground. Yes, we're ordered to bring about Islam in power. No question about that. I don't have a problem with actually saying we need to put in the power of liberalism and universalism and blah, 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 all these different things. Yes, we're ordered to basically seek power and seek justice, or else we would be contradicting ourselves. So when you look at لِنَعْلَمَ أَيُّ الْحِزْبَيْنِ أَحْصَى, when Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala tells us the story of the people of Ahl al-Kahf and tells us that even if you're a small group of young men or young women, you just work towards the legacy. Don't worry about, do we have enough power to overcome this or that? And that's why he was telling us about that. إِنَّهُمْ فِتْيَةٌ آمَنُوا بِرَبِّهِمْ وَزِدْنَاهُمْ هُدًى وَرَبَطْنَا عَلَىٰ قُلُوبِهِمْ إِذْ قَامُوا. And then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala basically tells us about Ashab al-Kahf. They were just young men. Fityatun, just young men. What about them? They just believed in their Lord Almighty, and zidnahum huda. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala increased them in guidance. Why? Because they were really committed. And that's one thing. Start with putting guidance. Start with learning Islam, and you're going to see down the road, as you learn Islam, the more you are committed, then you will become the leader and you will be the beacon to make a change farther than makanatikum, farther than what you're stepping on. And it's going to be an influence. But that is not until we would embrace what? Until we embrace what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala was giving us in 1, staying away from ghafla, 2, having al-ikhlas. Having al-ikhlas is key, sincerity, that we're doing this not for power, not for fame, and certainly only for Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Only for Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and only for Jannah. That is when Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will put the blessings. What is a blessing? A blessing is a force of good within that thing. So let's say you drink water, okay? You drink water, and then let's say this water contained a blessing. This water is supposed to just hydrate you, okay? It's supposed to just hydrate you, and that was it, right? But if it's a blessed water, then it's going to go farther than just giving you hydration to probably giving you cure, maybe to an illness. Okay? And that's the same thing. Somebody can be blessed. People can be blessed. Yes. I know some groups, without naming names, they are really careful, and I would say sometimes exaggerate and say, no, you can't say X or Y or Z is blessed. Yes, you can. You can say X or Y and Z is blessed, but to exaggerate and actually start, making them into a position like they are prophets, that's when we would definitely say, don't exceed the limit, because you never know whether this person can fall in fitna or not. But can I say, hey, mashallah, I anticipate, or I think that, I guess, Maryam or Umayyah or Reshma or whatever is basically having some barakah. When she came to my house, I saw that I was feeling better. I saw that I was basically getting, right after that, I basically got a phone call that I was accepted for a job, or I got a child, or probably a healing, or probably, I was in a fight with my husband, and once that sister got involved, the barakah came in. Some people, subhanallah, they are a barakah because whenever they come into your life, they bring happiness, they bring health, they bring mental health, they bring good vibes. That's a barakah. A barakah. Some people, wallahi al-azim, they're a barakah in their presence. They're a barakah. With their influence goes farther than just one direction. Even when they come into your life, you could see a change. You be a barakah. Let's see, said seeking power is such a taboo thing in my culture, West Africa, and they have systemic rule. So one thing, when that's okay. The Salihin used to say that the last thing to come out of the hearts of the Salihin is hubbur riyasa, is the love for leadership. So from that sense, it's not a taboo per se to, from that sense, it is a taboo. Sorry, it's not that it's not a taboo. It is a taboo to love leadership. If you mean by leadership to be in place of authority, then certainly, yes, it's a taboo to mean that it carries a lot of fitna within it. It carries a lot of fitna within it because the responsibility is big, and therefore you are more likely not to be capable of fulfilling the responsibility in the way that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala had commanded you to basically be at that level of commitment. Because think of it as you're going into the highest level of exam. The highest level of exam is when you have too many responsibilities, and then if you fail in that, well, you chose to be in that highest level of testing. You accepted to be in that highest level of testing, then therefore you're going to have to be accountable for it. So certainly in that situation, we would agree that this level of testing is definitely a serious matter. So it's not good to seek leadership as in authority, but we're talking about a leadership to mean commitment and carry the legacy of the prophets. That's what we mean by leadership. I'm not talking about leadership to me to say, hey, I want to be the president and basically start being the bossy one here and trying to give these orders to people. That's not the leadership that I'm talking about. The leadership that I'm talking about is basically not being the follower of batil, but being the one to bring about the revival of the Prophet's legacy, to the commitment, and basically the leadership to mean that you are bringing in the power of the deen to fight, let's say it that way, to fight, to overcome, to tackle all the different, let's call it shaitan tactics or misconceptions or different shahawat, and you're basically coming in as what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala said, al-mu'minuna wal-mu'minatu ba'duhum awliya'a ba'd. He said the believing men and the believing women are awliya'u ba'd. So the leadership position that I'm talking about is that walaya, is that position of carrying on the mission. So if, let's not confuse leadership to being in authority, but I'm talking about mission here. So what mission would we carry? Okay, let's see. A sister is also saying, if a person feels overwhelmed, it just doesn't want to have any relationship with Muslims, but he just doesn't want to leave Islam because he recognizes that Islam is not a problem, but the people, especially Tawheed, he just loves that. So what do you think what he needs to do? Is he a hypocrite? He recognizes that Islam is the best. Okay, fair enough. It reminds me of a story. Let me tell you what happened. We were doing an event. This boy is a Somali boy, comes over, and he starts basically saying, I'm going to leave the place. We were in an area that was predominantly Asian area, an Asian masjid, basically. So he said, you know what? I've never felt discriminated against. Oh, I forgot to mention that he said that a boy came over and just slapped him. And then we got this boy and he said, why did you slap this Somali boy? And he said, well, my mother told me when Africans hit, whenever you see an African, slap them before they slap you because they are violent people. So he said his mother taught him that in order to be protected, you do the first slap because they have the tendency to be violent. So you be prepared to start the first slap to teach them a lesson. That was basically what happened. So the Somali boy attempts to exit the place, and he says, I never had seen such discrimination, and I'm going to be leaving, and I'm never coming back. So I said, I need you to come over. And I want you to learn this masjid is the house of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. It's not the house of any community in particular, but it's the house of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And you need to recognize that you as a Muslim, you have a mission, you have a responsibility to make this be the house of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. If your home is messy, you don't get out of your home and expect someone else to clean it for you. No, you clean it because you recognize that this is your responsibility. So when you see the Muslim ummah, whether they're behind in their education, they're behind in their economy, they're behind in their political power, they're behind in the number 1, 2, 3, and more even things, then you make the change that is needed. Don't expect, if you recognize that, hey, we're regressing in 1, 2, 3 areas, I'm not expecting you to change everything. But why did you think someone else is supposed to make the change? You participate in making the change, because if you feel you belong to this ummah, then you recognize that I have a duty towards making this ummah victorious. Don't expect a kafir to tell you, yeah, we're going to give you the power, we're going to give you the support, we're going to give you the protection. A kafir is not going to do that. You have to do that. You have to work towards bringing in better education, bringing in better protection, bringing in security, bringing in cleanness. You see the place dirty? Well, maybe you can start a program to bring, I guess, cleaner streets, maybe better roads, maybe get into the government and start probably getting involved in how we can make this a better place, make this a better community. Don't expect the kafir to come in and actually make it a better place for you. You make it better. You be the person to be the leader. And of course, instead of cursing the dark, light the candle. Simple. Light the candle. Don't run away and think someone else is going to do the job. You put in. This is your ummah and not an outside ummah. If you feel a part of this ummah, then you coordinate, you lead, you participate, you basically include yourself within the ummah and create the change. All right, this is it. Subhanakallahumma wa bihamdik nastaghfiruka wa natubu ilayk nashhadu an la ilaha illa ant. Mashallah, we've got a good number right there. And if there's anybody that has any questions, they want to unmute themselves, go ahead, my friends. Any questions? Anybody would like to unmute themselves? That's okay. If you don't want to unmute yourselves, here's what I'll do. I'll basically